with Conquer Trading and Investing, and we're getting ready here to do what we do best, put the work in, taking a look at the markets, making sure we stay on the right side. We're going to be taking a look today specifically at Ethereum. Ethereum here is obviously working its way well off its 2025 bottom. We have some really, really interesting change in dynamics, including obviously Tom Lee and Bitmine taking a look at putting Ethereum as a treasury asset, public company raising money in the debt markets and purchasing Ethereum, much like Strategy's playbook, only instead of Bitcoin on Ethereum. We're seeing things like Peter Thiel, PayPal Mafia, Peter Thiel, Facebook, Peter Thiel, Plantar taking a 9.1% position into Tom Lee's Ethereum treasury company. You know what? He's got a track record of being on the right side. And more importantly, is this a sign that Bitcoin has indeed entered into its second phase of the bull market? We are seeing many signs here of alts continuing to make their breakout, not just versus the dollar. We've been watching, and we set this up together last week out here on the channel, and the follow through continues to extend. But now we're seeing alts here actually able to make the breakout versus Bitcoin. And our estimation or our assumption here is that now that we have this nice buy impulse taking place against Bitcoin, that no, this is not alt season, that likely we're going to see, and I think a sharp pump. What's interesting about this too, we'll come right back to this in 1 second, but what's really interesting about this is you're seeing Solana is now entering in the market, and you can see here, first of all, on the buy side boost, we have Bitcoin out of the market, but on this entry into Solana, that came from Ethereum holding 2/3 of a position of the full account, locking in about 27% profit at the time as Solana enters the market. That right there executed beautifully. And you see here, what's interesting is Bitcoin is out of the market. Bitcoin, ever since 2023, has been like always in the market, leading the alts on the sidelines at many different times. And now we entered into what looks like a new regime here, where you see Ethereum with the heavy carry, 26% into profit, Cardano recently entering the market, and now Solana entering the market. And you could see here as Bitcoin is out, I mean, not Bitcoin is not, as alts here are having some carry, it's reflected in our mechanical positioning. I just find that really fascinating, really neat. And yes, my expectations are that there should be some follow through here. It's probably pretty sharp. When you get a move against Bitcoin, with alts, it's usually sharp. And I think that Bitcoin dominance has the potential and possibility to come down towards 60, 61%. I think that's probably where this move bottoms out, but it might not. It might not. That's my projection. That's just my estimate of what likely transpires and takes place. We're seeing, obviously, across the wires, the mic doesn't sound good today. I thought I had, you know what? I actually tried a new setup today on the mic, and I thought it was going to be sounding even better than previous days. I took a long look at it yesterday. There was a comment that we should take a look at the compressor. Let me go ahead and turn the mic up volume over here. And I hope that's better. I'm really trying to dial this in and figure it out. And I'll continue to do so until we get it right. It's a shame, such high signal. And when we get going, we want to make sure that everyone could be dialed in. The communication is very, very, very important. So, anyway, I'll continue. Yes, lots of my comments. I didn't know it was so bad yesterday, and that's a shame because yesterday was such a fantastic session introducing what was the structure. Obviously, first looked at Bitcoin and then taking a look back at Amazon, Tesla, looking at that in relation to Microsoft, where Microsoft broke down after being in that ultimate market opportunity after from Windows 95 all the way through the dot-com bubble burst. And then when it had the competition, how you saw it leave the ultimate market opportunity until it was able to regain a new trend when Microsoft entered into the cloud computing. And it was beautiful to see. And then also in gold. And you could see gold's three different mega bull markets. I'm including the latest one in that, and just giving or having that understanding that you can never get comfortable and you always have to look for potentially where you could get wrong. Bitcoin bull runs, you're having some errors over here. Bitcoin bull runs obviously continues to extend out. What I would suggest if you're having any trouble is just go into, I would go into the dashboard over here and just go ahead and just create a new copy. Go down to Bitcoin Bull Run and create a new copy over there and see if that fixes the situation. If it doesn't, go ahead and just message me and we'll figure it out for you. And we'll see what happened and we'll go ahead and make sure that everything's in order. Tesla also right here today is pending long. So we saw once again Trump doing Trump things as the market was after today's inflation data, which obviously came in confirming yesterday's CPI a little bit, softer than analysts at least thought was going to happen. And markets initially favorable reaction off of that, and then the first hour of the U.S. markets open, markets under a little bit of soft pressure, and then able to pick up momentum until Trump decides, or the White House, I should say, leaks something that Trump might fire Powell. He's drafted a letter. New York Times chiming in, and then ultimately Trump is like, no, we're not planning on doing anything. The change is gonna come 8 months from now, and I mean, what it's doing here is, well, whatever. I mean, whatever. We'll just leave it at that. And guess what? This is just a strong hat tip to hard money. You saw gold's reaction out of this over here today, and gold shot up on that, and then since came into this area of resistance, likely cleared a lot of stops over here, and now is coming wicking back down. And you know what? Bitcoin has a decentralized monetary policy. You don't get to pick one guy, place him as chairman, and then have the board vote on what's going to take place and what's going to happen. And, Bitcoin's monetary policy is coded and absolutely one of the greatest innovations of 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 human history, of human history. Absolutely beautiful. And once Tesla enters and once Bitcoin enters, I mean, Bitcoin bull run's obviously doing its thing here in the bull market. And we could see the Supreme Court did say that, you know what, look, like the Federal Reserve, there's nothing federal about it. The president cannot fire the chairman. We know that it's, even though the Federal Reserve Act in 1913 created the institution, what was that? The third time the bankers took back power? They tried to get Andrew Jackson, the guy who took down the banks the previous time, off the $20 bill. They wanted to put Harry Tubman up there, and then laugh. Anyway, great morning, everyone. We are close to seeing a full allocation across stocks if Tesla does wind up by the end of the day taking a long into the market. We see that MicroStrategy up almost 13% here. FNGU on the late entry because of the ticker change is right now down 3%. We're looking at the spot ETFs, the Bitcoin spot ETFs. This is IBIT. This is up almost 9%. NVIDIA just under 20% unrealized gains, and TQQQ doing its thing here, 26% into open positions. And it's absolutely beautiful if Tesla is able to enter in the market, have a full allocation, and then get some carry. Obviously, Bitcoin bull runs is still in the market. And then we're seeing Bitcoin here with the breakout. It's coming into some resistance. You see it over there? I see the resistance, our structural resistance, and you can see a few different touches. And if Bitcoin's able to break above this resistance over here, we're going to be getting a re-entry from our mechanical standpoint over here. And you can see that all of our swing trading iterations are pretty close. We're just waiting on the CTM filter across on the buy side only on BTC 107 across all iterations. We're just waiting on the CTM filter at this point. So if Bitcoin is able to break above that little bit of resistance, we will be following and then have a full allocation. Bitcoin, Ethereum, Cardano, Solana, and if Tesla enters, it's been a while since we've had full into the market 100% allocation across stocks on the daily time frame and across Bitcoin and crypto. Absolutely, absolutely beautiful. From a discretionary standpoint, I talked about that bad stop place, that bad, poor stop loss placement yesterday. And what could have been done better? I wonder. And so should it have been under this resistance? I think it was a good place. I mean, I put it where actually I thought from a discretionary standpoint was the place to put it. And I put it underneath that first retest. We wound up coming into it and testing it, holding for a few bars, and then ultimately grabbing the liquidity. The other option would have been down here, where likely the learning experience here was should that have been placed off of this, the double touch of resistance? And would that have been the better place? Well, that depends. That depends on what happens over here, whether we continue to move up or if ultimately we trade lower than that, right? But I'm just trying to, always work on my game and just figure out what potentially would have been the better place to do. I'm curious if those two lined up, and they don't at all. Yeah, I was thought maybe we get there. So yeah, that's the art of trading there. It's just managing risk. And you know what? You're not always going to be right. In this case, it wound up being 7-8% take out of the market. That's fine. I was looking for a little bit more. Is it time to look for a reentry for something like this here if we break out to the upside? Or is it better to say, you know what? That would be the indication of a buy impulse. But we were just looking at that structural resistance, which you can see very clearly as put it over there. Let's just go ahead and dial this down a tiny bit, right? So that we have these touches here, the support and the touches, and getting above that, I think that's the trigger. So, whole number actually 120,000 just above it. That's where we'll look for a discretionary re-entry into the market on the upside as far as the stop loss of that triggers, right? And that's the most important thing because you can't size your trade unless you know how much you're risking. And, at this point, you keep the top. Yes, very. I'm just going to come down to the wick below here. That would be the stop loss because this is like CTM 1.0 style stop loss placement, slightly up over here. I'll just continue using that same structure I was using. And in this case over here on an entry above 120,000, you're risking roughly over here, just over 3%, 3.5%. Actually, I would use the stop loss actually probably taking out that wick over here. So a little bit longer, 3.6%, right? So obviously, much like a mechanical system, if you're risking 3.5%, you could do something smart like, if you're able to get the resumption out above here, you can move your stop loss to break even, kind of, lock in some of the potential risk that was out on the table. But more importantly, you're looking to for that trade, obviously to carry as far as possible. You don't want to like, oh, I have a 2-to-1 risk to reward ratio so that if this moves 7%, I'm just going to take the profit. Bitcoin here has a lot of momentum. We're seeing obviously not just Bitcoin, we're seeing speculation taking place in the markets as alts are breaking out versus Bitcoin. And that's beautiful. that's opening up potentially the next leg of this market. If Bitcoin is able to resume out of here, there could be some further carry. You want to have minimum a 2-to-1 risk to reward, not like I take profit on a 2-to-1 basis, but overall, meaning likely you have a few trades that are taking a 4-to-1, 8-to-1, or even further. Some trades stopping out at break even, and then others stopping out. And overall, you want to have at least a 2-to-1 risk to reward ratio. All of our mechanical systems have a much greater than 2-to-1 risk to reward. Here's Bitcoin over here, and you could see, risk to reward ratios. I'll go to average winning trade to average losing, and you can see that's about a 3.5 risk to reward. On Ethereum, you could say over here the average winning trade is 22%, the average losing. It's like a 9-to-1 risk to reward overall. You could say on Cardano, again, this is like an 8-to-1 risk to reward. It's even greater than an 8-to-1 risk to reward. My math was poor over there. This is like a 12% risk to reward. And then on Solana, you're looking at a 10-to-1 risk to reward. And you could say, well, you know what? Like this is profitable buy side only, or 50% of the time, with a 10-to-1 risk to reward. How does that make you feel about grabbing an entry here right now on the long side, right? But it's not that you take profit as you hit a 10-to-1 risk to reward. It's you have those trades that run that just wind up being allowed to run. Boom, 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 boom. Oh, you were checking out liquidity, and I want to take a look myself with you all. So Trump doing some Trump things, and yeah, I guess it's whatever. You can't fire the Fed chairman. I guess they could try to just constantly here degrade his reputation, maybe is what they're trying to do. Maybe they're trying to force him to quit. Ultimately, what happens as normal is a couple of months before Powell's set to retire, the new Fed chairman will be announced. Likely, what we'll see this time is prior to that normal scale of a couple of months, we'll probably find out who the next fair chair is prior to that. And ultimately, who's right or wrong, I don't know. I know that from Trump's standpoint, I don't think Trump wants the lower rates to like force this growth here. I think he wants the lower rates because the US would save about somewhere in the neighborhood of close to $1 trillion, about $800 billion, if they were to lower the rates and be able to roll over a bunch of this debt. And I think that's the issue here. And we'll find out, whether or not over the next month or two, whether or not ultimately, because we still don't have clarity. It's hard. It's hard for everyone to do their job. It must be hard for the Fed to do their job when the president is renegotiation the United States trade deals, or trying to renegotiate their trade deals. And honestly, I mean, they have 8 years ago, 2016, to look back, and they have an idea about how inflationary or not tariffs were. But they're going under the problem with academics being in a position like this is that honestly they don't have real world experience. They spent a lot of time, in an academic setting. You have Ben Bernanke, he wrote his thesis on basically helicopter money. Like, if there's a crisis, giving money directly to the consumer. And that, then you had obviously helicopter Ben, and he was like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and he got to go ahead and do that. And I guess we don't know. I mean, Powell, unfortunately, he doesn't have the best track record here as a Fed chair. He really messed up with not doing what he had to do in 2020, and that was be the liquidity of last resort and flood the system. He absolutely had to do that. What's really interesting, if you go to September 2019, before the global lockdowns, we saw as the Fed's balance sheet began growing again and they had to abruptly stop QE, that there was a systematic issue. And it's almost like a ticking time bomb. And then ultimately, when it blew up, they were there to provide that liquidity. Zero hedge, if you're able to really filter out a ton of noise, has some of the longest track record for the highest signal. They were right there on the day, September 19th, pointing it out. I'm not sure if we were live together or not back then. Now, what I'm trying to get at over here, though, is Powell messed up for how long he ran quantitative easing. He ran it for the next 2 years at a clip of $1.2 trillion a year. And then he just kept rates low and he began raising rates way too late. And then on top, more so, he really misread how the inflation from the actions of not only the Fed but also the White House, the PPI programs, basically lending money, giving money to businesses and then forgiving it, the stimmy checks direct to the people. They misread how inflationary that was going to be, and potentially, he still has, I think, a couple of months. I think in the next couple of months, you could see that it winds up being some of this tariffs remain sticky. There's actually no taco. And then if that's passed on to the consumer, you know, at that point, then maybe Powell was a little right, except that it'll probably be way significant lower than they projected the amount of those price increases. And more so, that likely will wind up being overpowered in the months ahead after that by disinflationary forces. And then if you get two major strikes in a period of 4 or 5 years as the Fed chair, that's really poor performance. And like a lot of people are worried about the precedent of the Fed chair being fired. Well, if you're not capable of doing your job, I mean, Powell also, he's 72 years old. He's been at the head here for quite a while now, right? And if you're not as sharp as you used to be, well, then the American people and the world, because the whole reason El Salvador began to adopt Bitcoin was because they didn't get any stimmy checks. They used the dollar as their reserve currency, and they didn't, as legal tender. They didn't get any stimmy checks, but they got the massive devaluation effect. And he's like, "This is nonsense. This is not working out." So that's my view on the situation. I think it's tough for everyone, but I think that you can't just be locked in and be the head of the Federal Reserve, one of the most powerful institutions in the world, and not perform. You needed to get it right, and if you're not getting it right, and you really got it wrong, inflation is transitory, and it seems that you're getting it wrong right now. You know, that's my little rant on that, and yeah, I mean, when they're saying, listen, if it weren't for the tariffs, we would have been cutting already. It's one thing if they're saying, well, the economy is running strong and we don't think that we would need to cut. But what they're saying is that they feel that they need to cut. Anyway, what else is going on here? How is the dollar? Look at that. You had the breakout, the retest on the Trump being Trump news over here, and that's just disrupting things. Let me come down to the daily so I could see. So we saw a brief bid on the news into bonds. Nothing to read here. We continue to watch over here as we are currently on a sell impulse on bonds to see if that goes the other way, but more so zoomed out. We just continue this mega coil. My hypothesis remains that why it could go to either end over here, likely the break is going to be to the upside. I know where I'm wrong and I know where that's right and how to manage the risk around that. And here we are. So, yes, it's nice seeing Ethereum run here right now today. We talked about Tom Lee. Tom Lee has he has a decent history, and when I say decent, because as I remember correctly, in 2018, he thought that I'm not on the Bitcoin. Let me come to Bitcoin 1 second. In 2018, as we entered what was a bear market period uh, on on uh, on Bitcoin, he thought that Bitcoin was going to be trading throughout that year above 20,000, and it went down drastically low. And Tom remained very bullish throughout that. I mean, that didn't sway him. That was offsides. I think that's the only time I know of Tom being really offsides. And I thought at that point, well, he's probably just a permeable then, that works out really well, right? If you're permeable out on the CNBC and all the newscasts, because you're going to be right more often than you're wrong. However, we look to be right and on the right side, make sure that we stay on the right side across markets at all times. We look for that perfection. I think Tom called though in 2022. I think he was bearish, so said, "Oh, he's probably not a permeable," and maybe like everyone, he just had a misread at the time. That's all. But if you remember during that period, right over here in 2019, Bitcoin's around 5,000, coming right out of the bottom. Tom out on CNBC, and he's like, "This is just a good reminder, a blast from the past over here." You can see
right now if you actually think it's undervalued by that extent?
Well, we think the best approach for most people is just to put 1% or 2%.
Are you saying that? I get that if you're somebody who's got a lot of assets. I still think it's crazy. But for a retail investor, somebody who's saving for retirement and putting that aside, that seems crazy to me.
Well, it's basically the idea that you can afford to lose 1% if that's 1% of your portfolio.
That's crazy. You might as well throw it away on high fees to an investor, to an average like this. You're taking a flyer on that. You don't know where it's going to go. Or
that's crazy. That's crazy. Can you imagine any investor who would have put 1 or 2% of their portfolio into Bitcoin? Very conservative, right? Like exactly. If you would have put 1% and lost it, it's not much different than the fees you're paying. However, at this point in time, as Bitcoin here has over 20x from here, 22x from here, if you would have put 1 or 2% into your portfolio, investors would be doing significantly better. Tom was well ahead of his time. Let me go ahead and check the liquidation levels that were currently around over here. She's like, "That's crazy. That's crazy. That's crazy." And I mean, ooh, look at this. Close to market. I'm looking at Binance over here, and we got, just from where we are right here, we got lots of liquidations here on both sides. It seems that the sellers are trying to defend over to just above 120,000. What we talked about, that entry was just above 120,000, and you could see that. Well, at least there'll be an initial carry, likely taking out those shorts if that will happen. Coming down over here is a pretty big wall, about 1.1 billion dollars of potential liquidations on the sell side, and on the buy side, just under 700,000 coming down over here to not too far away from market, 117,000, and again, much more over here, closer to 1.8 billion, down to 116,000. So pretty tight market over here, and we might see some fireworks on both sides. People getting a little aggressive right now with the leverage, and we'll find out how that works out for them. Bitcoin, and again, just bringing it back over here, and it does look to me that, you know what, you could be like, I remember the amount of absolute significant bearish over here, and especially a lot of the Bitcoiners pointing out the Ethereum Bitcoin crossover. And I want to look at, and laughing, and I want to look at, more importantly, Ethereum Solana with you all in 1 second. But before we do, I mean, look, you never know, and this is why you have a system to trade. You could see after riding the significant weakness, after riding down the significant weakness, able to make the turn on momentum over here. That was a nice 50% gain, a little flip flopping, even trying here on the short side, and which now looks like a clear spring. And this looked like winds up being, in hindsight, an accumulation pattern, and then back in over here again. Now open. I mean, having a clear plan to trade that gives you a significant edge is absolutely everything until you have it. Like most traders, aspiring traders, they spend all the time in the markets kind of trading without a whim, knowing that they should have a plan, not having a plan. But once you have a plan in place, man, that's like step one. Now you have to deal with the discipline, the focus, the determination, and the grind of executing it. Like, you have to figure, and here's Ethereum going back probably to March of 2021, not too far, but 113 trades. And you have to have that discipline to be able to execute, to work through the drawdowns, to work through, we're just coming off some drawdowns. Like Ethereum over here, like, to be fair and not to confuse anyone, we determined, and you can see it over here, we determined that, look, when you can't see that, huh? I guess I need a better placement of this. Maybe it should be up over here, or maybe here so no one forgets. We figured out that, we talk about Bitcoin being the rising tide that lifts all boats, and we have our filters. And it turns out that when Bitcoin is in a bull market, when the bull market is currently active, at that point in time, you have to lighten up on Ethereum's filter. And we turn to turning off the ST2 when Bitcoin is in a bull market potential phase. And when it's not, and you're seeing that, you're going to, obviously, if Bitcoin is not in a bull market, and you're seeing, like, and you can see like areas where at that point in time, then you want to have the extra filter on Ethereum, and you want to stop it from getting faked out on the upside as much. And then that works out being significantly better way to go ahead and maneuver. We're always learning. We're always improving. That's where we are. Yeah, I want to. So first, let me move over to Solana and Ethereum to get a glance at what's taking place over here, because we were seeing a pretty significant breakdown occur, and I loved seeing yesterday. By the way, looking at this launch pattern that's developing here on Riot, MicroStrategy right now is in the midst of breaking out from it, and we've looked at Bitcoin in yesterday's session. It came up when gold, at some point during its history, had a very similar pattern. And what wound up happening was that gold never made the launch and the move up. Gold wound up making significantly lower lows. And that's just it's beautiful to see a pattern occurring on different time frames and on different assets such as this. And then all the ones we had looked at up until now, though, had, well, I can't say they all had successful outcomes. MicroStrategy is just in the midst of breaking out from it. Only Bitcoin had a successful outcome. Riot hasn't yet even triggered. And the assumption was, for me, that, well, that's a bullish pattern that ultimately is going to wind up, leading the right way. The reminder there from gold was, no, that's not the case. You always have to know where you're wrong, and all patterns are meant just to be able to manage risk around. There's no magic sauce, right? The magic sauce is in how you manage risk. So let me go ahead and take a look at Solana. Then we could take a look at BNB and see what it's doing versus Bitcoin as well. What's going on, guys? What's going on, TradingView? Let me give this a quick refresh over here. So how is the mic today, by the way? Is this, since we raised the volume, actually a little bit better? or is it not? Sorry, it's obviously Solana Ethereum. Here we go. Finally. So that took a minute. So we're seeing here as Solana enters the market, right? We're definitely seeing continued breakdown, and you could just zoom out a little, and I could see all of this resistance ends down over here. This was our earliest where we put the breakdown looked like it was going to have follow through, and then we talked about to just below where the market wicked down is a next area or zone of support, and we've pierced through that today, and then I wonder, you have to wonder if something like this is then going to develop. And let me just point you over to what just happened recently on Ethereum, and where we were just talking about this right here. Like, is that what we're seeing? You can see that Ethereum was able to break down the support and then come up the other way. And then you could say, well, that's where you have the breakout to the upside. And you could do the same thing on Solana. And we have this line over here. So again, always looking for where we're wrong. We seem to be breaking down right now. We're clearing all last bit of hope of support, and the question is Ethereum going to accelerate right now? There are factors here that you could see that happening, such as Tom Lee's new Ethereum treasury company. And it's not just Tom Lee by himself now, Fundstrat. You're seeing Peter Thiel getting involved, and he's got a strong track record of making really, really good investments. And it's easy to see why that type of dynamic could continue to place a bid in Ethereum that could take Ethereum to break out to its new all-time high. And I have to say now, in the duration of what this past bear market on Ethereum was versus the US dollar, right? Where you had that 92% drawdown, and now you're looking at it now and you're like, I mean, I guess that's reduced volatility. When I'm looking at this right now too, and I'm asking myself, is Bitcoin for sure has entered into the early majority of adoption? Is this a dynamic where you have an early start? Don't forget the market cap of Ethereum is significantly lower than Bitcoin's. Are we going to see further corporates follow Tom Lee's playbook over here? Or I should say Michael Saylor's playbook. Well, Michael Saylor wasn't even the first one, right? I forget who it was. If you go to the Satoshi Institute, guys back then, early on, OG Bitcoiners were game playing that eventually corporates would do exactly what Saylor does. Saylor attributes his education to a few different things. He attributes it to the Bitcoin standard, to some of Lynn Alden's work, and to Nakamoto Institute as well. So he might have actually have got the idea from there, but he's the first one to execute, right, on a large scale, this strategy that now is being copycatted uh, throughout a lot of different corporates, and now moving into Ethereum. I'm asking myself, is this the hype phase of Ethereum? And is this the facing reality? And is Ethereum actually about to now make it out of the facing reality stage? We talk about when it does, you could see the top form of the top tier of the structure being reached. These double lines over here, I think that remains a significant potential. That could be something very high into the summer of 2027. I mean, those are very, very, very lofty numbers, right? And even soon, right? You could see, could we see 10,000 Ethereum? I mean, I'm backing off. I don't want to throw out numbers like that or expectations like that. But if things continue to play out, whereas no, the second phase is just beginning here of Bitcoin's bull market. Monetary policy doesn't even align yet. And you could look forward and you could say, again, we have to keep watching the data. This is the most important thing to decide what happens. And that is, you know what? Are we going to see the hard data be able to maintain or further deterioration? And we point to the next 6 weeks as being a really important area because in past times, from where we are today until roughly 40 days from now, that's when you saw the hard data uh, weaken and us enter into an event-driven recession. It matters whether or not the Fed is going to be cutting into a normalization where you see roughly S&P 500 up 13% 12 months out, or if they're cutting into a recession where you see S&P 500 down on average 11%. And if they begin the next phase of the Fed cycle, and that is beginning to cut interest rates down, and if they're doing that into normalization, we could continue to see risk responding very favorably. We could look out and say, and again, I like towards the end of September because the seasonalities into the end of September, that September is normally a little bumpy. And if we're able to make it out into the end of the year and we continue to see risk running and, equities doing some similar to the whole 1996 to 2000 bull market, including the same correction in this area, we could see a very favorable time going forward. And if we do, right now we're just getting started in what is now the second phase. And I don't want to give expectations, but yeah, this is the expectations is that this is could be hit at any point coming into the Bitcoin's 2028 halving. Those are high and lofty numbers. So what about BNB and Bitcoin? And so again, just to finish over here, we're continuing to see further breakdown on the Solana Ethereum pair. We're seeing further momentum into Ethereum, and that could carry. And you could see Ethereum basically eat Solana's lunch here. We know that Solana is now entering the market. So finally a bid into Solana here as far as momentum. And this is where we find out if this is a liquidity grab or not. And we look for a confirmation on a breakout above here. And a smaller one, is this too aggressive? That needs to be watched as well. A black diamond in there. So obviously we'll be checking back on that, which is why I'm just trying to lay out exactly what's happening right now. So let me zoom out over here and we're watching obviously the alts and we're seeing alts break out. You know what? Has anyone checked the volume on Binance and whether or not you continue to see volume stable? Is trading increasing? Is it decreasing? What's going on over there? You would think of alts get a little bit of a pump here, right? That you're going to see a lots more speculation taking place on Binance, and then that could lead to a little bit further of a big move here on BNB. Let's line it up. Let's just take. So my first glance is like most people's first glance is this, and that's okay, and that's good, and that's conservative. But I'm more interested in first checking out what's going on over here. And I say, well, I don't think that's structure, but I see where I see structure. So I'm going to try to line it up over here, and I'm going to see it looks funky, and I'm not getting any good read over here at all, right? It's not clear. Maybe I was right on that. I don't feel confident about any like that doesn't seem so it doesn't seem very exact to me. I'm always looking for exact. So I'm going to fall back over here. I'm going to go with what you need for a confirmation of an actual buying impulse taking place. And then you can look down over here. We just talked about that similar situation that was occurring on Ethereum versus Solana versus Ethereum. And you know what? Is this going to lead to a breakout? Look, I don't think there's any reason to get aggressive. This is Bitcoin's continues to be and have every reason to shine. If you're seeing BNB showing relative weakness, and when I say relative weakness, well, look at Ethereum, Bitcoin, and obviously you're not seeing relative weakness here. You're seeing strength, right? And you want to be where the strength is. You can make a case for why dynamics are going to increasingly favor Ethereum right now when you begin having, Bitmine working on putting Ethereum onto their treasury, taking supply off the market and holding it. And, why BNB at this particular point in time? And again, are we seeing volume increase out on Binance? Do we think that, remember, this is not alt season. This could be a moment of glory where we see a pump first Bitcoin, but those pumps usually are quick. Maybe Bitcoin dominance comes down to 60, 61. They're not usually long lasting. Do you want to be where the relative strength is, or do you want to be what's showing relative weakness? And you could look at we could look at BNB to ETH, and ETH is clearly showing relative strength to BNB. So the question would be, why BNB? Why now? And if you really are tied to it and want it, you have to wait for that buy impulse for its Bitcoin to trigger. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense right now. Oh yeah, and again, a major thing that could definitely change the dynamics here would be if you saw the macro begin to deteriorate. That's going to favor Bitcoin over Ethereum. If you were to see a major adoption event, such as the Bitcoin Act, that's going to favor Ethereum. Or if you were to see everything at this point go status quo, and you could then see the run on Ethereum continue to go here, and Ethereum could legit just be getting started. Let's see what happens here with Bitmine and when these purchases come in to market. Solana Bitcoin. I saw something about GME. I mean, it feels like to me that GME, GameStop, just they dropped the ball. You saw it in the stock price, and when they raised uh, a bunch of money. I don't follow GameStop closely. It was $4 billion, was it not? And then you saw Bitcoin drop down below 80,000 during April, and it turns out they bought $500 million worth, and the market did not like that, and you saw GameStop sell off on that, and it seemed that the idea was they were adopting the Bitcoin Treasury playbook. They didn't follow through with it, and that's that. So again, relative strength, is that where momentum is right now? It doesn't seem it to me. Does that mean that overall? So we have to be careful about ETFs as much as that. Well, Ethereum's ETF was active and launched for quite a while with very little inflows coming into it, and Ethereum price getting absolutely wrecked. So the flows into the ETFs are very important. And will Solana have its time, right? Um, and exactly, will there also then be after it? Eventually, likely, if Ethereum treasury companies are successful, then likely you see that further speculation down the risk curve from Bitcoin to Ethereum, and it's going to be Solana. And and when that's happening, that's when the iron is hot, and that's a good time to be looking here for speculating there. Right now, it seems to be Ethereum's moment. I mean, we're long, holding an unrealized gain 20, 27, 28% after booking just 50% off the low, and Ethereum here is primed and likely at the very beginning stages of what could be some follow through. Now, could you make the case that in the future, Solana ETFs active with flows coming into them? And we are seeing flows beginning to come into Ethereum's ETF. I'm sorry I don't have that up. I could actually pull it up pretty quickly for you. So we're seeing Ethereum go from, six and a half billion to almost doubling that in a pretty short amount of time frame. And we're beginning to see that funds are beginning to flow into Ethereum, and you can see it reflected in its price as well. And but for a long time, that was not happening. And it was launched, and there was just nothing. Right then, November came, Trump administration elected, mega pump, and then for a long time, nothing. And that's not what was happening during Bitcoin during that time. Here's Solana, not even, I guess, being seated right now. Nothing else than that. And Bitcoin, up until the election, you were seeing that bid. It wasn't like Ethereum, and the bid was much bigger than the Ethereum, right? Following price down in April, and you can see all the money going into Bitcoin. Absolutely beautiful. So for Ethereum ETF, you got BlackRock is ETHA. Look at Grayscale with the old just ETH. So yeah, there's a lot of momentum right now into Ethereum. Obviously, Bitcoin remains very strong. We're seeing versus the dollar, alts beginning to make that move that we were spot on at the right time to be involved. And now we're beginning to see that move extend out into Bitcoin. And we're seeing alts making a trend line break versus Bitcoin, a buy impulse. And we're seeing on our mechanical systems here, we're seeing, wow, we have now Solana in the market, Cardano in the market, Ethereum in the market. Bitcoin is on the verge, but it's not in the market right now. And you can see that relative strength of alts. I don't think it's going to be long lived. I think it'll be sharp, but and weeks, a couple of weeks is what I imagine. But that doesn't matter what I think. What matters what happens, and we'll be continue holding these trades until momentum takes them out, and that right there is everything. So up on the docket today is watching for Tesla to see whether or not it enters the market for a full 100% allocation. We continue and hold on these open trades. Absolutely beautiful. And then we're seeing now the change as Solana has entered the market for buy side boost. And then here we're just waiting on Bitcoin to see when it's going to enter into the market. And it's close. We're just waiting on the CTM filter. Here's Bitcoin here with risk today, recovering after Trump's or the White House's and New York Times, Powell and Trump leak and pumped denying it. Yeah, I mean, Solana will have its time. And Solana right now is entering the market versus the dollar. And it's doing it with what we have over a 10-to-1 risk to reward ratio. So, the average winning trade on Solana right now is 56%. I was just trying to do a stop loss is 10-to-1, 60%. Average winning trade, 56%. That's average. Obviously, that's there's much greater than average that take place. And coming back over here, 2023, 120%. Obviously, the further you go back, you're going to get bigger gains when actually alt season is taking place. 300% and whatnot. And we'll see where this one goes. We always hope for the best, but always expectations should be, well, my win ratio is on Solana buy side only rather high, 57%. That means roughly 5 trades out of every 10 are going to stop out. So 50-50 chance that this trade takes off or not. That's all. That's the way to look at it. All right, everyone. It just passed after I heard it's corrupt. I heard that the reason that, what was it, seven lawmakers voted against it on the Republican side was, it turns out it was a backdoor to CBDC. I haven't read the bill. I'm not really sure. And what I obviously forget, don't trust, verify. When it comes to government, just don't trust. And then obviously in the past 24 hours, they've all now come to the side. Interesting that it's passed. I do not have any targets when you like, I guess for Bitcoin we do. So if I'm looking at a target though, like, let me come to a higher, like, will there be another alt season? I don't think there'll ever be an alt season like we've seen in the past. I think once we get to the speculation phase of markets, right? Like when we get to like monetary policies aligned, people are feeling good, frothy, they're out there taking risks, they got money to take risks with. At that point in time, I bet you see things like betting sites at all-time high volumes as well. And you begin to see lots of speculation across markets. Just think of early 2021, right? When they had flooded the system, handing out stimmy checks, and people were speculating. And why I don't think there'll be an alt season like we saw, obviously, back in 2017, or even much the same, which was much different in 2021. I think that when those conditions arise again, there'll be rampant speculation, and their alts, especially select alts, top tier alts, are going to do really, really well overall. Like I'm talking Ethereum, Solana, and I put Cardano in that basket, right? Do I see Cardano taking out the Trump pump high when $1.30, when conditions are much more favorable? Yes. Do I think that Solana has the opportunity to trade back above 2.5? Yeah, I would not be surprised if that were to happen. We talked about recently the founder talking about selling Cardano to buy Bitcoin, and how that's not likely favorable. But the same breath, I said, listen, it doesn't matter. Like if Cardano is weak, it's one of our best shorting, like best instruments for the short side. And at the same time, it's going to have those mega pumps, like, and markets don't have to make sense. That's the whole thing. That's where many of a value investor got it wrong, is why we stick for the momentum. And rather than trying to have any type of projection about like what I think is happening on what time, we'll just continue executing, and we'll make sure that we're on the right side as momentum dictates, and for how long it dictates. And that's a great place to be. And that's where we are right now. All right, everyone. That's a great way to leave it. Listen, on your way out today, please show some love. Just take a second here, hit that thumbs up. If you're new here and you enjoy being here, if you enjoyed and learned something new, subscribe to the channel. Join us each and every day. Everyone, have a beautiful day. God bless you. See you all back on the inside. Big shout out to everyone on the replay crew. And today, especially to the silent majority. Everyone, I'll see you all soon.